Radioactive medicine. Our first photo is a testament to the dark past of human medicine. The man you can see in this picture was named Eben Byers. And now I will tell you how this man ended up this way. Eben Byers was born in 1880 as the son of successful industrialist Alexander Byers. As such, Eben was born into a very wealthy family and enjoyed all kinds of luxuries growing up. This included memberships at Yale University and a position in New York's high society. On top of that, he was incredibly good-looking and was considered a charismatic young man. While a young man at Yale, he had been known as Foxy Grandpa for his suave ways and success with the ladies. After graduating from Yale University, there was no need for Eben to get a job. After all, his father had more money than he could possibly spend. As a result, Eben focused on a passion of his, being professional golfing, and he was quite successful at it. In 2005, he actually became the US amateur golf champion, making him the best amateur golfer in the entire world. Most people who win this tournament end up becoming successful professional golfers, but not Eben. The young man most likely planned to continue on this path, but with growing age, his father decided to hand over the gigantic family business to Eben. Eben became the chairman of the Girard Iron Company overnight. And you have to understand that this was one of the world's largest steel companies at the time. So if he was already considered rich, Eben then became incredibly rich and influential. For example, he famously befriended the founders and executives at the Coca-Cola Company. Up until this point, Eben's life could be described as perfect. Thinking back to the picture I showed you, you must be thinking that something drastic must have happened to cause such a change. An accident in his steel factory, or maybe some deadly diseases befell the man. Well, in reality, the trigger was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. In 1927, at 47 years old, Eben decided to watch a football game at his old university. So he hopped on a train to travel to Yale. There, everything goes fine, and he gets back on the train to return home. Being the rich man he was, Eben obviously bought a first-class ticket for the 12-hour voyage back to Pittsburgh, mostly to get in some sleep. After a few hours, Eben accidentally fell off his top bunk and hit the ground. In the process, he landed hard on his left shoulder, which caused a shooting pain in his right arm. At first, he wasn't concerned about this and went back to sleep. But when he arrived in Pittsburgh, the pain was still present. However, there were no apparent injuries like bruises. So, as soon as he arrived home, he contacted his personal physical therapist. The therapist obviously examined his arm, but came to the conclusion that there was no structural damage to his arm, or specifically his shoulder. This wasn't good news for Eben, because he was feeling the pain, and he still had no idea where it originated from. And then his physical therapist makes a suggestion that ultimately dooms Eben Byers. The therapist had heard of a new experimental drug that had recently entered the market. The medicine was quite expensive, but considering Eben's wealth, the therapist saw no problem in acquiring it for him. This drug was called Radithor and promised to dull any pain as well as to immensely boost your energy. Eben was excited about the prospect of getting this new remedy and happily agreed. Eben gets a prescription, goes to the drugstore and buys a half-ounce bottle of Radithor. As prescribed, he drank a small spoonful of this liquid, and it actually worked. Soon after, he felt a surge of energy going through him, and the chronic pain in his arm started to disappear. So, for the next few days, he continued to take the prescribed dose of Radithor. With every passing day, he felt fitter and more alive. And this was where things went wrong, because Eben suddenly decided to take a bit more radithor than originally prescribed. To be precise, he drank between 2 or 3 whole bottles on a daily basis. There are 2 main theories as to why he became so obsessed with this stuff. The first one obviously being a classic addiction, like we see it with all kinds of drugs. The second one is a bit more personal and has something to do with his performance in bed. You see, Eben was known as a womanizer, but with growing age his performance was rumored to have decreased significantly. A problem radithor could fix. Either way, Eben took about 1,400 doses of radithor before quitting the drug in 1930. At this point he had lost weight, was suffering from headaches, and his teeth began to fall out. And then shortly after, his jaw literally fell off. His lower jaw just separated from his skull, and at some point it was severed by a surgeon. Leading to the picture I showed you in the beginning. As it turns out, radithor was actually no wonder drug, but just radioactive water. I am not shitting you. It was literally just water mixed with radium, a highly radioactive element. Back then, radium was believed to have highly curative properties without any side effects. Radithor was just one of many products using this deadly element. Eben is a perfect example of this cruel medical mistake, as his body began to decay. Besides using his lower jaw, the radiation sickness also completely destroyed his upper jaw, and his remaining bone tissue literally began to disintegrate. There were literally holes growing in his skull, while the man was still alive. His death on March 31st, 1932, was attributed to radiation poisoning, using the terminology of the time. But it was due to cancers, not acute radiation syndrome. Radium is known to emit alpha, beta, and gamma radiation. While alpha radiation has low penetrating ability and typically does not present a danger, ingestion of radium in the form of radithor allowed accumulation in the bones. Without shielding provided by the skin, the highly ionizing alpha radiation was able to cause localized cell damage on an extreme level. And this is ultimately what led to Byers' cancer and death. This photo is a dark reminder of this man's disturbing fate, all caused by a simple fall on a train ride and by the ignorance of past doctors. The first cosmonaut. This photo depicts the tragic fate of the world's first cosmonaut, cosmonaut being the Russian term for astronaut. Vladimir Komarov was a Soviet test pilot, aerospace engineer, and cosmonaut. He became the first Soviet cosmonaut to fly in space twice, when he was selected as the solo pilot of Soyuz 1, its first crewed test flight. This time, he was supposed to become the first human to orbit the Earth. However, as you can imagine, this project went horribly wrong. Even though this was a solo mission, there was always a need for a backup pilot in case Komarov would have to be replaced. This backup pilot was Yuri Gagarin, who also happened to be Komarov's best friend. This fact is important because it makes Komarov's fate so much more tragic. Due to the global political situation, the Soviet Union put a lot of pressure on Komarov to successfully pull off this mission. Both Komarov and Yuri trained their asses off for this mission. However, they were both aware that their individual skills were completely inconsequential for the success of this mission. Especially, Komarov knew that the Soyuz 1 was not ready for this mission, and that whoever boarded the capsule would definitely die. During a full-blown inspection of the capsule, Komarov and dozens of other engineers found a whopping 203 crucial structural issues. And like with any modern Boeing plane, they knew that this capsule would crash. The engineers obviously demanded to postpone the mission, both for safety reasons and because there was no way the test would end up being a success. But since it was the Soviet Union and the space race, the communist leaders obviously ignored any advice. The political goal they hoped to achieve with this mission made them forget any logic or reason. Komarov was painfully aware of both the structural issues as well their leader's decision to run the test anyway. Documents that later came to surface describe a conversation between Komarov and a KGB agent, wherein Komarov told the man that he was certain he was going to die. And this is where this story becomes both wholesome and tragic. The KGB agent asked him, "So if you know you are going to die, then why don't you refuse the mission?" And Komarov just answered, "Well, if I refuse, they will force my best friend to go up there, and he will die, so I have to go." At the same time, Yuri, his best friend, begged Komarov to let him do the mission because he also wanted to save his friend's life. But since Komarov was the first pilot, he had control over this decision, and he firmly decided that he would not let his friend die on a mission he is supposed to execute. This alone would be enough to make Komarov a legend, but the way he went out was even more badass. Since he was aware of his impending death, he organized for his funeral to be an open casket. He wanted the Soviet leadership to see what they had done. Judging by this photo, he achieved his goal. Komarov got in the Soyuz on launch day, he took off, and it didn't take long for the first problem to arrive. Besides a low amount of power and poor communication, the vessel was spinning uncontrollably. Even the leaders told him to just cancel the mission and come back, because now they all saw that the mission was doomed. However, at this point, nothing could save Komarov. He tried to re-enter the atmosphere for 5 hours straight, but because of all the structural issues, it was simply impossible. Sometime during this whole ordeal, American intelligence recorded a conversation between Komarov and a Soviet leader on the ground. The leader expressed how sorry he felt for Komarov and that he is going to be known as a hero. Even his wife was allowed to have one last talk with Komarov. They talked about their kids and their house, and overall just normal stuff considering his situation. Komarov is still completely fine, but he and everyone else knows that his vessel is doomed. After the call ended, Komarov actually managed to re-enter Earth's atmosphere on his 19th attempt, which honestly shocked everyone present at the scene. But he is still doomed because the capsule's parachute malfunctions. As he falls to the ground, he curses the Soviet leadership before smashing into the ground. When they opened the capsule, it was revealed that Komarov had died even more horrifically than anticipated. He had probably survived the initial impact and literally burned to death inside the crash vessel. Following this wish for an open casket funeral, his charred remains were publicly displayed, a last move to shame the Soviet leadership for what they had done to him. Here's the legendary photo showing the actual Soviet leaders gathering around Komarov's remains. If you ask me, judging by their faces, Komarov succeeded in his plan to shame them. Overall, the man is a legend who saved his best friend, shamed his country's leaders for their mistakes, and faced death head-on, seemingly without any regret. Bloody Ioana. Ioana Constantinescu was a 27-year-old woman living in the Romanian city of Timisoara. She was known for practicing Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest organized religions. It originated in ancient Persia and nowadays is primarily practiced in East Asia. This was a problem for Ioana as the city of Timisoara was dominated by Christianity. Since she was not Christian, she was deemed a witch by the townspeople. As a result, she was persecuted and ostracized by the whole community, especially by 2 Christian ministers who spread a rumor that she was abducting local children and drank their blood to stay young forever, all in the name of Satan, which they accused her of worshipping. Since they were the religious leaders of this community, everyone believed these stories, and Loana was considered an evil witch by everyone. She was blamed for every bad thing someone experienced in the town and became the most hated person around. At some point, the situation escalated and an angry Christian mob stormed her house. They took her out on the streets and nearly beat her to death before she was brought to a hospital. Despite her wounds, she only stayed in the hospital for 2 days. Then she returned home against her doctor's advice. 1 day later, she was found dead inside her home by her family and friends. They assumed that Loana had died as a result of her injuries, and that her decision to leave the hospital before fully recovering was a lethal mistake. However, when police investigated the crime scene, they disagreed with that theory. In their opinion, her old wounds were not the reason she had died. Instead, she had fresh wounds, and the whole scene was described as a ritual suicide. She was just laying on her couch with her arms on her chest, nearly emulating a deceased body in a casket. Besides her was an altar with occult symbols, ritualistic herbs, and a goblet with what appeared to be bloodstains. They discovered that she had cuts all over her body that were hidden by her clothes. The autopsy revealed something truly disturbing. Loana had died of blood loss, but she had also suffered cardiac arrest due to the immense amount of blood she had consumed prior to her death. Of course, no one saw what really happened, but the evidence suggests that she had been draining her own blood and drank it as part of some occult ritual. Locals believe that by sacrificing herself as part of this ritual, she cursed the townspeople who viciously attacked her. Those rumors were further fueled because all the prominent figures involved in her beating died soon after. The 2 Christian ministers who spread the witchcraft rumors both suddenly died of a rare blood disease. Likewise, the 2 main vigilantes who organized the mob and beat Loana died in freak accidents. One was hit by a falling tree, and just a few days later, the other one burned to death in his home. And if you believe the locals, Loana's curse is far from over. According to the legend, many who see this photo of Loana end up suffering from intense sleep paralysis, even people who have never experienced this issue before. And since I have shown you the picture, you are now cursed too. What a happy note to end this video on. You're welcome.